the last 3 weeks, this is week 4. This is actually our final. It's actually our final week in this series called Spiritual Wars. We've been going through, and the first week we answered the question, what is the war about? Well, the answer to that question turned out to be Galatians 1:1-5, that this spiritual warfare that's going on is really honestly about the true gospel versus the false gospel. It's not necessarily binary, as in a good versus an evil, just a flat out, clear lines kind of a thing, but the lines are actually a little bit, they're not quite as clear cut as we may think they are. The next week we went through and asked the question, who is involved in this battle? And we discovered that our battle is not against flesh and blood from Ephesians 6:10-12, that our battle is actually against the rulers, the powers, and the authorities of a spiritual realm that is just beyond our sight, that we can't necessarily sense with our five senses, but it nonetheless, it is still there, and it is very, very much real. Last week we talked about how, we asked the question, how do we engage in this war? And we engage in this war, Ephesians 6:13-20, we engage this with God's power and his armor. And we went through and discovered that actually the armor of God describes Jesus Christ. that is who is described in all of the armor of God. This week, we ask the question, where? Where is this war fought? We know what the war is about. We know who is involved now. We know how the war is engaged. But now we finish this series off by asking, where is this war fought? And, there's three possibilities. There are three possibilities of what people generally think about spiritual warfare. The first thing people think is that, well, there's just no such thing as spiritual warfare. Believe it or not, there are people that think this. They really do. Most are outside of the church, but there are those within the church that think spiritual warfare is more of a charismatic kind of a thing, the Pentecostals and that kind of thing. There's just kind of sensationalism. I hate to tell you, but no. The second possibility is that people think that this is just purely spiritual. It's in a realm that we just can't see, and it has nothing to do with the physical realm. Yes, there are people that think that too. And then the third thing is that people think that it's purely physical, that somehow a spiritual war is entirely in a physical realm, and it doesn't occur anywhere but here. The question is really that it really is, where is the battle fought? The thing is that spiritual warfare and where it occurs, there's more than just meets the eye. Yeah, I kind of took that from Transformers for the kids in the room who like the Transformer. I loved Transformers growing up. I used more than meets the eye. I still love the Transformers. They're cool, dude. They really are. It's a semi-truck that turns into a walking robot. Like cool. But there really is more than meets the eye with spiritual warfare. There really, really and truly is. There's more than meets the eye. Let me go back through. Let me read. I'm going to read one more time. I'm going to read Ephesians 6:10-20. Finally, be strong in the Lord in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God so that you will be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. Stand firm, therefore, having girded your loins with truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. In addition to all, taking up the shield of faith, with which you will be able to extinguish all of the flaming arrows of the evil one. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. With all prayer and petition, pray at all times in the Spirit, and with this in view, be on alert with all perseverance and petition for the saints, and pray on my behalf, that utterance may be given to me in the opening of my mouth, to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, and that in proclaiming it I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. Ephesians 6:12. We went through this in week 2 of this series, but verse 12 is huge, because not only does verse 12 describe who is involved besides us, but it also explains where. It really does. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness. That is the who. The where is right there in 4 words, in the heavenly places. But let me kind of go back. Let me give an example here. We start off in the book of Genesis, okay? And we've talked about the creation. We've been through creation a lot this year. And we've talked about Adam and Eve. We've talked about Cain and Abel. And we get to chapter 6, and we are introduced to Noah. Noah is a righteous man in the eyes of God in a world where people have only evil all the time as the inclination of their heart. Think about this world and the way it is now and how pitiful that it can be at times. The pre-flood world was absolute pure evil with the exception of 8 people. And I would argue possibly that it was Noah and maybe 1 or 2 of his sons. Ham ended up being cursed after the flood. But Noah goes through. God tells him what's going to happen and tells him to build an ark. Noah believes. He believes what God tells him. He goes off, he builds an ark. 8 people are saved through this ark, through this flood. And afterwards, we find in chapter 11, chapter 10 goes through his descendants. Chapter 11 goes through and talks about the Tower of Babel, which we talked about last week, right? And how all of the nations were divided up amongst these 70 lesser gods in the spiritual realm. And I put quotes around it, but they really are lesser gods. It is quite possibly a ruling council of 70 spiritual world beings that are now split up among, ironically enough, the 70 different nations that are named in chapter 10. And now each one of them has a lesser god, a god, ruling over them. And then we see God talking to a man named Abram, who God has picked to make a people of his own. All of the nations have these gods, Baal and Molech and Asherah and all these other gods over their nation, each one to one nation. And now we see God working through Abram to build a nation of his own that will be God's inheritance. Abraham, we go through Isaac, right? His son, the promised child, the child of promise. Isaac then bears 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau and Jacob, actually. The younger gets the blessing over the older, the twins. Jacob then has a son named Joseph, who was a prophet for all intents and purposes, and had dreams and visions and declared them to his brothers, who then got jealous and sold him off into slavery. And through the course of the story of Genesis, Joseph ends up in Egypt. there's a famine over the land, and Joseph, God actually, saves Jacob's family from the famine through Joseph, who was sold into slavery. And Joseph's like, God has put me here in this place for a purpose. Genesis 11 to 50 is the story of how Israel got to Egypt. But the question is, why would God send Israel to a pagan nation of Egypt? Yeah, I mean, the surface answer, right? The surface answer really is to save Israel through the famine, okay? But more than that, Israel was in Egypt precisely so that God could deliver them. The whole reason for Israel going to Egypt is so that God can show his glory to these other nations, to the lesser gods. Israel was his possession, as the other nations were the lesser gods' nations. We see that evidenced in Daniel 10 with the prince of Persia, right? He's the prince, the king, the spiritual world king, ruling over the kingdom of Persia. And he stops this angel from delivering a message to Daniel. So the true battlefield then is not just this spiritual realm. Exodus 12, verse 12. That's a whole load of crazy. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all of the firstborn of the land of Egypt. This is the pronouncement of the curse and the plague of the firstborn over Egypt, right? He's going to take all the firstborn. We all know this. Verse 12 holds a key that even I have looked over 1,000 times. Okay? For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. That gods is a little g God. It is the lesser gods. The Exodus plagues are spiritual warfare. I didn't realize this until I read it in a book called The Unseen Realms by Michael Heiser. I didn't see it. And when I about dropped the phone. I've got the book on my phone digitally. And I'm sitting here reading. I about dropped the phone. I'm like, wait a minute. The 10 plagues of Egypt are spiritual warfare? This completely changes everything that we think we know about spiritual warfare. Because we think spiritual warfare is where the devil just tries to keep us down, and that's not the case. You see, what spiritual warfare is a battle of the true gospel versus the false gospel. God is executing judgment in the form of 10 plagues on the gods of Egypt. It is a spiritual realm battle that spills over into the physical realm. Wow. Exodus 15 comes along, and the pericope in my Bible, most Bibles, is going to have something along the lines of Moses singing. It's a Moses song to God. It's the song of Moses in Israel, right? And in this song, in Exodus 15, Moses asks the question, then, who is like Yahweh? We've got all of these divine beings. We've got all of these lesser gods in the spiritual realm. Moses has just gone through this major spiritual warfare where he's, the 10 plagues of Egypt, and he's confronted Pharaoh, and all of these plagues are, God has rained this judgment down on the lesser gods, and this whole big spiritual warfare. Moses comes and asks the question, who is like Yahweh? The answer to that question is that nobody is like Yahweh. Why? Because he is the only God, the only creator God. God created these lesser beings, and they are subject to him. They are the image bearers in the spiritual realm, like we are the image bearers here in the physical. All an image bearer is to carry out the will of God in their designed realm. That's all it is. And Psalm 82 goes through and talks about how God is going to pronounce judgment on these lesser gods. They are going to be condemned to the fiery pits of hell because they failed at their job. Because why? Because they know better than God does. Or at least they think they do. It's all a bunch of lesser gods trying to vie for power. And the king of the lesser gods is none other than the devil, Satan, the enemy, whatever you want to title him. He is the king of the resistance against God. You see, there is no one like Yahweh. We believe in one God, Yahweh, because there is no one else who can tame the waters. See, there's a whole bunch of crazy right there when Moses splits the waters, or God splits the waters, and Moses and the Israelites walk through on dry ground. You see, that is a hearken back to Genesis 1:1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He created the spiritual realm. He created the physical realm. He created the deep, which is Sheol, the place in the abode of the dead. And he also created the waters of chaos. He created the chaos. The only one that can tame the chaos in this world and in the spiritual world is Yahweh. He's the only one that can tame the chaos. Think about Jesus walking on the water. Hearken back to taming the chaos. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? That's why Jesus is God, because the only one who can tame the chaos is God. He's the only one that can do these things. The true battlefield is the unseen realm that literally spills into the physical realm. What happens in the spiritual world affects the physical world. There's no two ways about it. It does. Bill and I were talking about it, sitting in Sunday school morning. There is a dimension, an alternate dimension of the spiritual realm. This stuff is real. It's not just a story on a page. These things are very, very real. So you're going, okay, so the plagues of Egypt are spiritual warfare. And you literally go through the Old Testament and you can you can see the spiritual warfare all over the place. But what is that? A lot of people then ask the question, what does that mean to me? What does that have to amount to a hill of beans right now? Because our world, our country is in absolute chaos. The division in our country is wider than the division of the waters at the Red Sea crossing. I mean, the division in this country is crazy. Let me tell you what. Let me see if I can bring this back around. Let me see if I can bring this back around and see if I can maybe shine a little light on what's going on in our world right now. I have said all through this sermon series that this series will shine light on what is going on in our world right now. And here we go. Okay? This is a spiritual battle that is going on right this very minute. Okay? It is a battle of the true gospel versus the false gospel. You remember my Johnny Preacher Man illustration that I gave? Oh, this was earlier this year. Where I talked about Johnny Preacher Man has got a problem. The average preacher man in the pulpit has got an issue. And that issue is that he's got not only a church with a mountain of debt, but he's got mountains of debt himself. Remember this? And in order to solve the problem of debt, he's got to come up with the idea of people. He needs people in the pews to donate money to get rid of his debt, and he needs to get rid of the church's debt. So they've got to have people, butts in the pews is what I call it. So what they do is they come up with this consumer churchianity. They come up with a church that is consumer-based. And it's a very emotional worship service, and it's in a large gathering, but then they have a problem because they don't have relationships. So they start up small groups and that further their relationships. All of the while, they're creating this massive experience while losing their biblical authority and their biblical understanding. Next slide, babe. I went through and talked about how Auguste Comte, back in 1830 to 1850, this French philosopher came up with this idea of positivism. And he wrote a series of books and several books, 4 books on it. And it's secular humanism is what it is. And Auguste Comte threw out in this book that we need a religion without a God. And in order to have a religion without a God, you need a high priest and a teacher. But who's going to pay a high priest money for a religion without a God? And this religion without a God cuts out the male-led design of God's word. Not to say that women are not important, but it is men are designed to be the leaders, and what this religion without a God does is elevate the female and pretty much just eliminate the male. Men are not good for much of anything. That's what this secular humanism goes for. So what they did was they came up with this idea that in order for somebody to have an authority over a person's success, right? This high priest, this teacher, needs to have authority over a person's success, and that they pay this high priest money. What they did was they took over the academic university system. It's called intellectual elitism. And it is the Church of America in the 21st century, because you really can't go anywhere without a degree and an approval from academia. Even the preacher in the pulpit has to have a degree in order to say that I am qualified by academia to be in this position. Next slide, babe. So you go back to the preacher, the average Johnny Preacher Man. He's got this whacked out religion of a no God education, trying to solve a problem of butts in the pews, using an academic model when a religion of no God, and our churches are absolutely, completely ineffective in preaching a false gospel. Let me see if I can take this. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to take it one step further, because I talked about this. That's why I went through it real quick. I talked about this in the sermon earlier this year. I'm going to take this, and we're going to go a step beyond in this series right now. Next slide, babe. This is something else I came up with this week, and when I had done the work up into a certain point, up to the Nazi manifesto in 1920. I'd done the work up till then. But I had not done the rest of this work, what's off to the right of that and down bottom. I had not put this together until this week, and when I saw it, I thought I was absolutely crazy. But then I realized that I'm not absolutely crazy. This is actually the way it is. Okay, so Around the time, we just talked about Auguste Comte, right, in the 1830s to 1850s. Well, around the same time as Auguste Comte is coming up with his religion without a God and this positivism, secular humanistic kind of an idea, guess what else was springing up between that time period? Socialism, communism, and Marxism. Marxism was written in 1848 was when the book on Marxism was published. Socialism, communism, and Marxism springs up the same time that Auguste Comte does. Darwin then becomes the poster boy of Auguste Comte's religion without a God in 1859 when he published the book. Oh, let me go through this. Auguste Comte, the 1830s, he wrote, it's called The Course in Positive Philosophy. And then he wrote A General View of Positivism in 1848, okay? Socialism and Marxism and communism come up around the same time in 1830 to 1850. The Communist Manifesto was written in 1848. Darwin then comes along in 1859 and writes a book called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, a racist book. It is a racist book. Evolution is racist, and it is built on the foundation of Auguste Comte's secular humanism and positivism and what? Socialism, communism, and Marxism. In 1877, really wackadoodle lady by the name of H.P. Blavatsky writes a book called Isis Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology. Whatever you do, do not go read this book. It is, I got through literally about a chapter, and I was like, what in the world is this lady talking? I mean, it is enemy territory. It is dangerous. But she writes this book, and she takes what Darwin took and built off of Auguste Comte and the socialist, Marxist, and communist idea. She builds on this and what Darwin did and writes this book called Isis Unveiled. And this, Isis Unveiled, is the enemy battle plan, is what it is. And it is absolutely wacko. It is, whoo, man, it is out there. I got through maybe a chapter of it. It is bonkers, absolutely crazy. Then you fast forward about 40 years, and in 1920, the 25-point Nazi manifesto is written, which is what the Nazis built on. And guess what the Nazis built on? Oh yeah, Auguste Comte and his secular humanism, socialism, Marxism, and communism, and racism of Darwin and the battle plan described in Isis Unveiled. What did the Nazis do? Racists. They get rid of all the blacks, the Jews. This is as far as I had gotten up until this week. I'd put all this together, and I had to stop because I'm just like, dude, this is crazy. But then I started wondering this week. I'm like, okay, so how do we get from the Nazi manifesto in 1920 to today? What has gone on? Well, here's the thing. Post World War II in 1945, when Germany fell, when the Nazi Party fell, what took off? Socialism, communism, and Marxism did. It went like wildfire through Asia, where every Asian nation now is socialist, communist, Marxist. And with all of the indoctrination over the course of close to 200 years, we are now battling socialism, communism, and Marxism worldwide. And when I say this, I kid you not. America is quite literally the last major nation besides one other nation to withstand socialism, communism, and Marxism and the evil therein. There's only one other nation besides America in the entire world that is not socialist, communist, or Marxist. And I'm telling you, socialism, communism, and Marxism is straight from the pits of the enemy and the devil. It is absolute contrary to the Bible. It is not how things are designed to work. The Bible all over the place assumes personal property ownership, capitalism. It assumes this. That's why the commandment, no stealing. In socialism, communism, and Marxism, what's yours is mine. Just the way it is. Now, we are, out of our personal gains and our personal property, we are told to share and give willingly, not be mandated by a government to do so. But America is quite literally the last nation besides one other nation to withstand socialism, communism, and Marxism. This is the last stand on the face of the planet. When I tell you the other nation, you're going to probably be in disbelief. Who's the other nation that has resisted this? Anybody have any idea? Israel. Israel's the only other nation to withstand socialism, communism, and Marxism. Other nations have democratic elections, but they are not democratic, actual democratic nations, because they're still socialist. They're still socialist. Israel started off socialist when it became a nation again back in the 40s. It started off as a socialist nation, and it has then progressed to be more capitalist. And now Israel is just like America. America has a split population. America and Israel are in the same boat. We've got half the population that wants socialism. We've got half the population that wants to abolish every last remnant of socialism. We are the last stand on earth. This is a spiritual war of epic and biblical proportions. It is so big that we don't even know how big it really is. Unfortunately, as I just stated, it's already started here. And it started a long time ago. Socialist principles have been enacted for quite a long time, dating back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was pretty much the first one to kick it in. And you know what kicked it in? The Great Depression. That's when he started enacting all the socialist principles. All the while, we're fighting communism in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and ironically enacting it in our own country. The Vietnam War, the Korean War are all false fronts. We're fighting communism, but it's a load of cow manure, because it is not what's actually going on. We say we're fighting against communism, but it really not, because Lyndon Johnson put the welfare state in a place in the 60s. That is socialism. It is. We have been fighting and trying to put this into our own culture for the last 75 to 100 years. This is the last stand. And I was talking to a friend this week, and you know what I did not even think about it when I said this. I just said it. I just said, this is like Custer's last stand. And I was like, oh crap. You know what happened at Custer's last stand? the good guys were annihilated. Every last one of them. This is the last stand. I'm not saying, I am not making a call on when Christ is coming back. I refuse to do that. But if I'm telling you once, I will tell you again, and I will say it emphatically. If you are not right with God, you need to get right with God, because it is really close. This is the last stand. This is the last call. Because the doors are about to shut. And when it shuts, you think it's ugly now. It is about to get really, really bad. Because what is going on is a battle, a spiritual battle of epic proportions that is going to shape up and end up in the fight of the century, the fight of not century, but the fight of history that can be found in the pages of Revelation. If you are not right with God, get right with God. The battlefield is literally the unseen realm that spills over into the physical. What we see here in the physical is not just a physical, just a physical thing. There are things going on in a spiritual realm that are affecting what's going on now. Now, I know I said a couple of weeks ago in week 2 about the American dream and how that's, a lesser God's Edenic vision for America. I get that. But, at this point, while that is still true, we need to kind of set that whole prosperity gospel that I described of the American dream. We need to kind of set that aside and kind of put that over in a corner for a minute. Because this is way bigger. This is way bigger than that. And quite literally, it is Israel and America against the world. I mean, it is the way it is right now. I mean, you don't have to look very far to see that really is the case. I had to call one of my buddy up in Guyman, Larry. I said, Larry, I am absolutely off my rocker. I said, there's no way that this is the case. And he goes, you're not crazy. Because that is the way it is. He's like, you're right. Go through the nations and look. Venezuela, the European Union, Russia, China, North Korea, South America, Africa. They are all Muslim nations. They're all socialist constructs. Every last one of them. Every last one of them. What you're seeing really is the way it is. And I don't have to tell you that it literally scared the holy bejeepers right out of me. I'm getting tired of being right. I really am. I'm really sick and tired of being right about this. Because this is scary stuff. It is frightening. I've been saying this for 8 years, and here we are. Next week, we are going to go on to a much, much lighter note. We're wrapping up the spiritual warfare series. I am glad it's only 4 weeks because it's been heavy on me, and I need a lighthearted sermon series. We're gonna starting next week. We're gonna go through. It'll be 4 weeks. It'll be 4 weeks, 4 Sundays of Christmas according to the Polar Express. That'll be a series you don't want to miss. There are 5 lessons that I've pulled from this movie. When I saw it, I was almost in disbelief. It'll be 4 Sundays, and then Christmas Eve we'll wrap up that sermon series. We'll talk about the Polar Express. The Polar Express. What? No, Christmas Eve is Christmas Eve is on a Thursday. Christmas is on a Friday because the 27th is the Sunday. So we're about to. We kicked off the Advent season with the lighting of the candles this week, and we'll get into a much more lighthearted sermon series before we delve back into it with living in Babylon. Because here's the case. If we are in the last stand and we are living in a culture that really is the last stand, we need to know how to live in a culture that is completely against everything that we stand for. We need to know how to live in that culture. And that's what we're gonna do next year. We're gonna kick it off with living in Babylon. And we're going to go through the book of Daniel, the first 6 chapters of Daniel next year. Where are you at today? I know this. I know this series is loaded with a whole bunch of crazy. And let me finish this off by saying this. You don't have to believe what I believe. Okay, you really don't. This is just a whole bunch of wackadoodle, as Larry says. This is a whole bunch of crazy. This is a whole bunch of I very well could be wrong. And I completely understand that I could be totally wrong about all of this. But if I'm not, God help us. God help us if I'm not wrong. I recognize that I could be wrong, but I really don't think I am, because this stuff is just, this stuff has just come flying out of the woodwork. And it's been confirmed all over the place. My biggest call, I had a dream, the really weird dream this week. And it was about hell. And I had this dream that we fall into the pits of hell, and we're trying to work our way up and trying to work our way up and trying to work our way up. And then you eventually get down there into hell, and the one thing, after they're there, it was almost like the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And in the end at the end of the dream, there was one line that came to me, and this was it. And the line that came was, "There's only one way." There's only one way, and that's through Jesus Christ. He is the only way to get rid. It's not going to come by your works. It's not going to come by anything you do. It's not going to come through any other religion. It's not going to come through science. It's not going to come through education or academia. It's not going to come any other way than through Jesus Christ himself. So if there's one thing that we get out of this spiritual warfare series, is that we have got to come to Jesus Christ in faith. That it's not about us, that it's not about our doing or anything that we can or can't do. Doesn't mean if you got a mess, if you don't need to clean it up, because if you got a mess, you need to clean it up. That's just the way it is. We have a responsibility there. But the first step in the process is getting right with God. We have got to get right with God. We've got to get our mind straightened around that it is not anything that we do afterwards that is going to save us. Everything that comes afterward is nothing more than spiritual maturity. Our works prove what we actually believe. It really does. That's the one thing we need to get out of this spiritual warfare, is that the time is short. Because every day that passes, regardless of if it's 2 years, 2 months, or 200 years down the road, Christ is coming again. And we need to be ready, because you know what? You never know what's going to happen. I mean, there have been people die of this COVID that you'd never thought that would, and they have. You don't know whether Jesus comes back or you you die and meet him. Be ready and be alert.